Is there anyone on this who's not on this team you would have liked to have seen in? I know you mentioned some of the guys admitted, but like John Tavares and Mark Scheifele are near the top of the list for me, and a lot of people are ringing over Colton Parayko being included when a guy like Mackenzie Weegar could have been considered. Noah Dobson you mentioned earlier, Evan Bouchard in Edmonton also could have been considered for that. I understand the thinking of having a safer look on defense. You make an excellent point with that, but a lot of talent excluded from this year's list.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that some of that's unfair to Colton Parayko, to be honest. I mean, he's big. He's a great defender. And I'm not saying like any of the players you mentioned, if they had made this team, I wouldn't have blinked, right? I wouldn't be sitting here going, how could they put, Dobson on this team? I mean, that guy had 70 points last year for the Islanders as a defenseman. Bouchard, we saw, record setting playoffs in Edmonton. I think that those players will still have their day for Team Canada. I really do believe that they'll be members of future Team Canadas, but I don't understand that maybe the hand wringing over the Parayko pick. I mean, he's just been there, done that, and I think will be a sturdy option for them. To me, the next choice, quite honestly, is likely Drew Doughty. If they encounter an injury on the blue line, I think Drew Doughty is going to find his way on this team over even the guys you mentioned. Now that's assuming a couple things. Drew Doughty hasn't played since October. It's assuming he gets back. He has a healthy return to the Kings lineup before the Four Nations tournament starts on February 12th, that he looks in any sort of normal shape. I think in that case, he's probably next man up on the blue line, just for a lot of the reasons I mentioned. I mean, that guy, there's nothing Drew Doughty hasn't seen in a hockey game, right? And he played in Vancouver and Sochi. He was at the World Cup. He's won 2 Stanley Cups in LA. He's someone that they know they can get in a big game and they can rely on him to make the right decisions on the ice. So I think he's probably next man up on the blue line. If there's an injury at forward, and that's, one thing we didn't really get into yet is this is the roster as of the start of December. It's very likely all 4 rosters are going to see some changes, unfortunately. I mean, I don't want to sit here and predict injuries, but it's 2 months of hockey. I mean, just the likelihood of all these teams remaining intact is very low. I think if Canada, or when Canada encounters a forward injury, it'll probably depend on what player's injured, what specific need they're filling. But I think John Tavares will be probably their next man up. Again, if it's a scoring winger they lose, probably not going to be John Tavares. It's the next man up. But I think he's certainly among the mix of players that I think are kind of on standby here that got a phone call saying, hey, you didn't quite make the team, but you're right there. And we'd like you to remain ready for February if you'd still like to come. John's had a great start to this year. I don't think there's really honestly anything more he could have done. He went to the World Championships. He was the captain, one of their best players at that tournament, and then had kind of a turn back the clock season so far in Toronto. If you look at Tavares' defensive metrics, even, he's scoring at roughly a point per game, filled in as the top line center when Austin Matthews missed a huge chunk of time in November. I think he put his best foot forward here. It's just, they got to make that call about going to someone younger, someone older. And, I guess maybe even just thinking what elements that player fills. I think, specifically with the players at the bottom of the forward group and defensive group, they're looking at guys who can play both sides, right? That's Travis Sanheim. He's a left shot who primarily plays on the right side. It was probably part of the case Mackenzie Weegar had. I know that that's a skill set he has, is that he can comfortably play in both sides, because the other factor of the tournament is you have 7D, you could have one injured in game one. And so to have someone who's maybe, a little lower down the depth chart, but that can fill in, is very valuable. And I think that goes for Jarvis, could play the wing on this team, has played some center at times, right shot player, could kill penalties for them. So, I think they were really looking for different elements there, but I've got Tavares as the next man up. I'm previewing a story that is yet to appear at The Athletic, Julian, but I'm doing every team's next man up at each position. And to spoil my story ahead of time, if you speed listen to this before you've read it, I've got Tavares and Doughty at the front, and then I've got Logan Thompson in goal. I think probably a toss-up between him and Joey Daccord. The whole Joey Daccord thing's funny. But
can you get into that, please? Because that is very much a discussion topic worth getting into with Joey Daccord.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's having a tremendous season in Seattle. Had a great season last year in Seattle as well. Earned a big contract extension, and he is from the Boston area, but the son of a father who grew up in Montreal and a mother who lived in Switzerland, who was born and raised in Switzerland. And so, and he's never played internationally. I mean, the way it works in the double IHF, and I might get the rules a little bit wrong, but this is the high level. You have to hold citizenship of a country, and you have to have played professionally in that country over 2 seasons, and to be able to play for that country internationally. And this is to avoid, for example, someone becoming a citizen of a country but not actually playing in that, not actually living or playing there. Just to this gets around that because you have to have lived and played there. Well, Joey Daccord played for the Ottawa Senators. And so he has Canadian citizenship through his father, doesn't own a passport at this point in time, but he played in Canada professionally. And so he's eligible to represent Canada professionally. Switzerland actually got in touch with him before last year's World Championship to see if he'd be interested in representing them. He's not eligible because he hasn't lived or played in Switzerland for 2 years. But if he lived or played in Switzerland for 2 years, somewhere down the line, he could still represent Switzerland. And of course, he can represent the U.S. As a U.S. born player. And so, 2 things to consider. First of all, no matter who he played for in this tournament, if he did, he could still play, at the Olympics or the World Championships, because this isn't a double IHF tournament, it's just an NHL event. And so down the road, he will maybe have a decision to make when it comes to a World Championship or something like that. But it sounds like he was open to playing for Canada. I think Canada did its due diligence. And I do think that Canada is open to bringing him if he gets a passport here between now and February and they encounter an injury. Obviously, he wasn't among the 3 goalies named to this point. So Joey Daccord remains kind of an interesting in the background, but, in talking to some people around that know him and that have worked with him, they say that sort of the bigger the game, the bigger he plays, that he's really a rise to the occasion type of goalie. And so there's still a world, even though he wasn't named, where Joey Daccord from the Boston area ends up representing Team Canada at this tournament. I mean, it's going to, it would count on someone else getting an injury. It would count on him being willing to do it, which it does seem like there's some indication he would be. But that would be an unusual one. I mean, typically you're used to maybe Canadians with dual citizenship playing somewhere else. It's not so much that when you're secondary kind of, we'll call it Canadian citizenship, and I'm not trying to demean his citizenship, but he obviously wasn't born and raised in Canada, that you end up finding your way to the national team.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating story. So I appreciate the context there. Anything else you want to mention about Team Canada before I look at some of the other teams?
No, I'm just curious to see what they do. I'm wondering if John Cooper, and he's not going to tip his hand just yet, if he goes with the all Nova Scotia line, and you get Marchand, Crosby, maybe Nathan McKinnon on the wing. That's pretty intriguing, because if you do that, you have a few different options for who you play with McDavid. I would think Mitch Marner probably ends up with McDavid if he does what I said with the first 3 players. On the left side, maybe Sam Reinhart. I mean, it's kind of fun. It's almost like fantasy hockey, like trying to build these lines and things. I can't even imagine what it's like to do it for real. Even picking the rosters, right? Like the players that have been left off this team are like, some of them are going to the Hall of Fame, obviously some pretty acclaimed guys that, if you're Don Sweeney or Jim Nill or Kyle Dubas, I mean, it's guys that you would want on your NHL team in a second for the most part. And yet they've got to sit there and kind of pick apart their games and find not necessarily weaknesses, but identify where, how it all fits together and all that. So anyway, what an exercise. And, it's kind of cool that it's got here. And now as I say, we just sort of wait with bated breath to see, the injury replacements, because I do think that is only a matter of time, not just for Canada, but all the teams.